Any extraordinary whiskey collection has to tell the story of American whiskey through its bottles. And I think what makes this whiskey collection so phenomenal is that it does that in all the right places. So you have pre-prohibition barrels, you have post-prohibition through the 50s and 60s heydays, but also during the glut era when you had some really amazing whiskey coming out that when we think back on it, we're kind of astounded that no one seemed to want.
These are bottles that you cannot just find anywhere. They're bottles you have to hunt down. They're bottles you have to queue up for. This is well thought through, it's meticulous, it's curated. This is the most insane American whiskey list we've ever looked at.
And it's remarkable that this is one man's collection.
With Scotch and Japanese, we've done this before, but there's never been a truly great American whiskey collection at auction until now.
One of the things that makes this sale so fun this year, being the 250th anniversary, is that American whiskey really did grow up with the Republic. And especially after the Revolution and independence from Britain, this is what Americans drank. They set aside rum and Madeira and these things that sort of were more preferred by the English and adopted whiskey as the national drink, separate from the traditions of old Europe.
This is incredibly extraordinary to see two of the three Black Hawk bottlings in one collection, side by side with the Red Hooks, side by side with the Binnies, the Sams, the Old Advocate, Gottlieb. I mean, these are the most incredible names in American whiskey collections.
My first reaction was just, wow. I mean, to be able to put together a collection not only this expansive, but this deep is mind-boggling to me. I mean, the depth of individual iterations of specific brands, of different ages of specific releases. I've never seen anything like this.
There are recent bottlings, there are prohibition bottlings. There's everything that you could want to make the great American whiskey collection.
I think until the last couple of decades, American whiskey was seen as the younger, less sophisticated brother of Scotch. So not only because American whiskey is phenomenal today, but also because people have gone back and reappraised the history of American whiskey and gone back to some of the iconic bottles that were produced throughout the 20th century and come to realize that this is some of the greatest whiskey ever made.
As someone who's not from America, American whiskey really speaks to a sense of place and a community here. As an outsider looking in, it's interesting to become involved in this industry and specifically how much people care about specific bottles within it. These single barrel bottlings are legendary.
A single barrel bottling is exactly what it sounds like, as opposed to a bunch of barrels that were dumped together. One of the things that really started the craze for single barrel bottlings was necessity. At the moment, every sale counted. And so they would fill specific barrels into an order because that's all that was needed. It was only much later that people realized that that created a unique product, a rare product by definition, that today is among the most sought after style or type of whiskey out there.
This isn't just a great American whiskey collection. This is the great collection with all of the greatest bottles that have ever been produced in this industry.
You can't look at this collection without seeing the legacy of the Van Winkle family just written all over this. It is the strongest representation of their family and heritage and lineage.
I'm Julian Van Winkle, president of the Old Rip Van Winkle Distillery. The brand Old Rip Van Winkle was started by my father. He bought the label from a fellow in Louisville, Kentucky in the 50s and never used it as a label when he was at Stitzel-Weller. And when we sold the distillery in 1972, the only thing he took with him was the Old Rip Van Winkle brand. The rest is history after that, as they say.
One of the things I think really sets the Van Winkle name apart from almost every other whiskey is that it really charts the history of American whiskey from the late 19th century. They produced a variety of brands that at the time were understood to be very good whiskey. Today are understood to be some of the greatest whiskey ever made.
Really, we focus on quality, and the sign at the distillery on the front gate, we make fine bourbon at a profit if we can, a loss if we must, but always fine bourbon is something our family still lives by. Is if you find a bottle like these bottles behind me, it's going to be very valuable, whereas back in the day, It was just another whiskey in a bottle.
So a feature of this collection is bottlings from Sam's, Binny's, Blue Smoke, Delilah's, Old Advocate, you name it. What's unique about these is very limited quantities were produced, which means the remnants of what's left of the greatest whiskeys of all time.
So this particular bottling, 20-year, we did for John Currents, who's the chef at City Grocery in Oxford, Mississippi. And this was the last single barrel, private barrel we'd bottled for anyone. It's a funny story. We shipped the cases from the barrel that John picked out to Mississippi ABC, and they immediately shipped all those bottles out to the stores all over the state. So he couldn't get them back, so we picked another barrel, which actually turned out to be a better barrel than the one that he picked, that we thought, or I did. He did get those cases himself, but so the first attempt, the Mississippi ABC sent them out to everyone's. Old Rip Van Winkle Distillery, 20 years old, distilled December 7th, 1982, and bottled May 23rd, 2003. Cask strength for Sam's in Chicago. And this is the highest proof, I think, that we've ever bottled, 133.4. Very special and obviously very rare. This is bottle 54 of 60. So obviously not many bottles from that barrel. We did a lot of this private labeling, I'd call it. The customers would come to us and they had their own idea what they wanted to put on the bottle as far as the label. And if the design worked for us, we went ahead and did it. But obviously we did a lot of those through the years. So it was kind of kept us in business, and it was kind of fun to be able to do that. It's something we can't do these days because of a shortage of product, but it sure was fun back then to have these customers come to us and have their ideas for their own label.
This is, I think, the pinnacle of American whiskey, especially in the 21st century. Things like this, where Julian was able to draw on some of the best whiskey stocks that he had for one particular client, drawing on one barrel that he decided was the best that he had for that client. This speaks to the individual, the intentionality that he brought to the process, that Sam's had in seeking this out. It's also signed by him here on the bottle. Every time one of these gets open, there's one fewer out there.
Okay, another Chicago liquor store, Binny's. This also was bottled in Frankfurt at Buffalo Trace. Distilled June 10th, 1985, the distillation date, and bottled in December 2003, which is about when we quit bottling in these single barrels. Good friends of ours that ran that store, and obviously another very rare bottling, and then it's 18 years old, 121.6 proof. So pretty cool stuff right there. So this is the Blue Smoke bottling for the Blue Smoke restaurant here in New York City, Danny Meyer's restaurant. Another 18-year-old product bottled at 92.6 proof. I remember going in the restaurant and seeing just bottles and bottles just lined up on the top shelf there. We had a lot of fun with this one. It was a pleasure to do business with Danny Meyer and his group. Old Advocate, bottled for 6 lawyers in Cincinnati, Ohio. I met them at a liquor store tasting, and they asked me if they could buy a barrel of whiskey. I think it was 10 to 12 years old, but it took about 4 or 5 years to actually bottle this, so that's why it ended up being 15 years old rather than 12 years old. Excellent whiskey, 107 proof, 15 years old, which would be right in my wheelhouse as far as the whiskeys that we have. This is my favorite distillation. So this is our Old Rip Van Winkle personalized package, we call it. And we would bottle these with no front label, just a back label. And the customer would either call us or go into a liquor store and put whatever names he wanted on the bottle on a form, and they'd send them to us. And we had a girl who actually did the calligraphy for us. And these were all usually gifts. That around Christmas time, we sold the hell out of these things. And that was very popular back when we had more whiskey to sell. My dad started this back after he sold Stitzel-Weller. He started the idea of the personalized packaging, which became very popular. So I've actually never tasted this particular one.
Do you want to taste it?
I'd love to give it a try. Let's do that. Wow. That's exceptional. That's got Van Winkle written all over it when you taste that Stitzel-Weller whiskey in there that we were able to get back in the day. When we bottled these brands behind us, or the bottlings behind us, the object was to just make money and keep alive. Keep the bank from calling me up every 3 months wanting their interest payment. So I was just trying to stay in business and had no desire or thought that these bottles would be worth so much money 20, 30 years down the road.
This is a bottling that Julian Van Winkle III did for Corti Brothers. And one of the super cool things about this bottle is he bottled it at a time when he just needed to get bottles out there into the world. He needed to make money. Looks nothing like a Van Winkle today. I think it speaks to an era when so many people were turning away from American whiskey, and yet there were these people like Van Winkle who were committed to the product and who wanted to preserve it. And almost like monks in a monastery were putting it out there for the world to consume so that someday the rest of the world would come around. And I think Corti Brothers, these bottlings, of which there are very few left, I mean, there are very few Corti Brothers bottles left in the world, I think they speak to that moment in a way that almost no other whiskey out there does.
We knew it was good, but the rest of the world kind of grabbed onto it eventually and found out that the whiskey was exceptional. And I think that's what drives the popularity of the brand. It's just the quality of the whiskey. It's not so much the Van Winkle name or the packaging or whatever. I think it's just the quality of the whiskey.
It's not only is it good whiskey, there's a lot of good whiskey, a lot of great whiskey out there. I think for a lot of people, Van Winkle whiskey, whether it's Stitzel-Weller or Old Commonwealth or Van Winkle today, it's really the benchmark for what great American whiskey is.
When evaluating collections, we look at the overall condition of what is in front of us. We have bottles as early as 1900. This is a remarkable collection in which the bottles have been kept in the most pristine condition possible.
The Black Hawk bottling is a set of different ages that they did for the Works family. This is a Chicago family. They own the Chicago Blackhawks hockey team, but also a big distributor. This was never for sale. This was a gift to that family. It even has their name right on the front. Collectors out there are essentially like archivists who are historians as collectors. They're the ones who preserve these bottles, who keep them in such beautiful condition, so that today we can sit, deconstruct the bottle, learn about it, talk about it, and explain where it fits in American whiskey history. The 4 different barrels of Linnell's Red Hook Rye, a bottle from each one is incredibly rare. To see at auction is incredibly valuable. But the idea of a complete set of all 4, that's just not something that you see very often. It hasn't happened in a long time. I don't know if it'll ever happen again. This bottle of OFC, for example, this is a historic bottle. The OFC, Old Fire Copper, was a distillery that was started by Colonel E.H. Taylor back in the 1870s. This was a pot still whiskey. That's what fire copper means. This was distilled in 1909 and bottled in 1919. Now, what that means is that it was one of the last bottles created before national prohibition. So this is a pre-prohibition distillation, a pre-prohibition bottling, which in and of itself, these days, is very rare to find. Keep in mind that this was bottled in 1919, so it's 106 years old, and yet the fill level is very high. The quality on the label, the tax stamp, everything is perfect. It has chemist's endorsement on the back, all these little things that today would not even be allowed.
This sale is filled with holy grails.
Some of them I've never seen. I mean, some of that old Stitzel-Weller stuff, like the Macy's bottle, I've never seen that before.
Collectors come to Sothebys in order to pick and choose some of the greatest whiskeys that have been already cataloged and identified and verified. We bring life back to some of these older bottles and unique bottles that have been hidden away for years and years and years.
Anytime you see some of these bottles come to auction, there's a decent chance that's the last time those bottles will ever come to auction. And so when you're thinking about value as a function of rarity, you can't get much more valuable than an auction like this.
It's interesting to see the journey of American whiskey, coming from a time when these bottles were affordable and quite easy to come across to a time when they're impossible to find. And they're not just in Kentucky coming out of distilleries, they're in the Breuer Building in New York on display and going under the hammer at Sothebys.
You're looking at the product of a passion. It reminds me that there is this beautiful spirit inside of it that has a story, that has a soul to it almost, that certainly has a history, that speaks to something much larger than all of us.